Good evening. My name is Giselle Skeet, and I will be presenting my case analysis this evening on the topic conflict 2. The definition of conflict. What is conflict? Conflict is the disagreement through which two or more parties perceive a threat to their interests, their needs, or their concern. The background of this story: Zach Electrical Parts had just completed their audit, and upon reviewing the audit report presented, the plant manager, Mr. Whitmore, became quite furious and dissatisfied with what he saw in the report, specifically for his assembly department. He then later picked up his phone and called the head of the audit team, the director, Mr. Byrne, and relayed his dissatisfaction. Mr. Whitmore believes that his company was given an unfair assessment because had there been communications between himself, Mr. Wells, who is the assembly head, and his audit team head, Miss Kimbrough, he believes that both him and Mr. Wells would have been able to provide information to deny some of the audit team's conclusion. One of the things I saw here was external conflict, which is a struggle between a person and an outside force. In this case, this is Mr. Whitmore struggling with the audit team, which is the outside force for Zach's Electrical Parts. Causes and antecedents of the conflict between the staff audit group and the plant manager. What I saw is poor communication. Poor communication increases uncertainty and therefore increases the chance of potential conflict. In this case, I saw information conflict. Had the information required by the audit team been given to them, they would have been able to properly give a proper assessment of their audit findings. So information conflict occurs when people lack important information. Had Miss Brock been able to reach Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Wells, she would have been able to have the information that Mr. Whitmore is talking about, and therefore write probably a different report, and certainly it would be a different report based on what Mr. Whitmore is saying, that the information he would have provided would have given an even better report. It would have been a different finding on the assembly department. So right away there was breakdown of communication. I had a couple of questions when I read this case. One of them were either party properly prepared for the audit? Normally for an audit, you know ahead of time that an audit is coming up. These are the things that we need to provide to the auditors. So another question: did they have the information that was required of them? Did they have the information from the auditors that this is what we're going to need, therefore this would help the audit to be conducted more efficiently? Then why didn't the management team at Zach's Electrical Part make themselves readily available for the audit? Because they had the information on the assembly department, so they should have made themselves readily available. Or even, why didn't they have subordinates available who could provide the information needed by the audit team? Because being a manager, your priorities are set differently, and they may have had other pressing issues to deal with. So having prior knowledge of what the audit team would have needed, they could have given it to their subordinate to present to the auditors when asked. And why didn't the audit team contact their superior about the challenges they were facing with both managers, instead of just completing your report and prepare it and sending out your reports when there wasn't any proper communication between the management team at Zach's Electrical and the audit team? So this therefore further broke down the communication. How can the staff unit work with line managers to minimize such conflict. In this case, all parties, Mr. Whitmore, Mr. Wells, the audit team, they all have to invest time and energy in preventing further escalation. So instead of arguing, he called Mr. Byrne in anger, expressing his anger on the audit report. And one of the best ways to prevent this further escalation is that Mr. Byrne didn't respond in the same angry tone. So by responding in a maybe equivalent, having an equivalent reaction or a less anger-filled reaction like Mr. Whitfield to the other party, and not overreact. This is what Mr. Byrne did. He acted professional. So by managing your emotions and staying focused on the issues involved, we can help prevent a conflict from escalating. Some of the other strategies that can be used to further manage the conflict and minimize the conflict that we saw, I feel collaborating in this case helps to further minimize a conflict from further escalation. This strategy reflects a high concern for your interest and the interest of the other party. This conflict management style emphasizes problem solving, and it pursues an outcome that satisfies both parties. It gives both parties what they want. Collaborating also helps to build commitment to the outcome, and generally this approach is also considered the best approach for managing most conflicts. One other way to minimize conflict is through negotiation. Negotiation helps, specifically integrative negotiation. This is a win-win negotiation in which the agreement involves no loss to either parties and neither party feels that they have lost. Integrative negotiation also helps to build that long-term relationship, which in this case, the relationship between the auditors and Zax Electrical Part, because companies, normally audit teams, stick around with a company they're auditing for a number of years before they switch over and move on to a different company, and that company they left takes up a new audit team. So you don't want a case where this year you are in total disagreement with the audit team for what they did. They didn't use the information that you had to further, deny the conclusion the audit team came to in this report. So you want to build a long-term relationship, and by using the integrative negotiation, some adjustment could be made to this audit report so that it would include the information that Mr. Whitmore believes would have caused a different conclusion about Zax Electrical Part. Also, I think this other topic, conciliation. Conciliation, sometimes when parties are unable to reach an acceptable solution to a conflict through direct negotiation, this is where conciliation comes into play. Conciliation is when a third party builds a positive relationship between the parties involved, improves their communication, and directs them towards a satisfactory agreement or settlement. In this case, Mr. Byrne, the director, he is communicating with Mr. Whitmore, the plant manager, and he is the director of the audit team that was headed by Miss Kimbrough. So by communicating, being the bridge, the link between both parties, by listening to both parties, he can get a better assessment of what the situation is and be able to come to a conclusion in terms of resolving any further problems that can escalate because of this audit report. Because I'm sure Mr. Whitmore would not want to lose possible investors or possibly losing his job when his heads would have seen what is presented in the audit report. So by being the conciliator between both parties, Mr. Byrne can have his team adjust the audit report in accordance with certain standards to include the information that Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Wells has to report on the Assembly Department. My conclusion on this topic is that not every conflict needs an escalation. In this case, there was obvious poor communication between both parties. Information was reported and prepared unbeknownst to the plant manager, Mr. Whitmore, and because Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Wells were unavailable to Miss Brock and her audit team, she went ahead and prepared and completed her report. So this created conflict right away because she cannot get the information she needs to complete her report. Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Wells is not available to give her the information, and when she completes this report, it ends up angering the plant manager. So there are ways to de-escalate these types of conflict by managing your emotions, staying focused on the issue involved, can help prevent the conflict from further escalation. Other avenues to de-escalate the conflict, as I said, would be integrative negotiation. Also helps to build long-term relationships. In this particular case, you need to have long-term relationship with your audit team. You don't want a case where audit team up and says, because this company is not providing us with the information, so therefore they might pull out from being your audit and say that we don't want to complete any more audits because it's going against certain auditing standards. So conciliation can be used, which also helps to build a positive relationship between the parties involved. This improves their communication and directs them towards a satisfactory settlement. So by everybody communicating, information is readily available, management designating lower line staff to provide audit information, because plant managers normally are busy with other areas of the plant, so their time may not be readily available to the audit team, so they could have further prepared their company for the auditors so that when they came to them to ask them for information, the information was provided. So by using some of these tactics like integrative negotiation and conciliation and collaborating, this can help to further minimize the situation we see at hand for Zacks Electrical. And this is my conclusion on my topic, conflict. Thank you and good evening.